Okay, so we're down to our last chapter, and this is a kind of, oh my God, what do we do chapter. How do we handle it? What works? What does not work? Now, keep in mind whether you agree with the different things that are put forth here in this chapter. These are the opinions of the authors. Yes, they are backed up by research, but again, there's plenty of room for people to disagree. I don't necessarily agree with everything that's in here. So it's about these are the options, these are the possibilities, and you, as you graduate and move on into those positions where you'll actually be in a position to put some of this stuff into play, it's up to you to put into play what you feel works and what doesn't. So a lot of it you have to just kind of put in the back of your head and decide whether you feel it's useful or not. So again, remember, there's two major sides to this as far as eradicating the drug problem. First is getting rid of the supply, which is, of course, the purview of the Drug Enforcement Administration. And then the other side is removing or reducing the demand for said supply. And that's mainly what we're going to be talking about here. And this is substance abuse treatment and prevention from people going down that path to begin with. And this one goes through an entirely different agency. This is not the purview of law enforcement. This is more the public health side. So when it comes to what's popular with the public, it's more about the supply side. So not surprising that they receive a lot more money than does the public health side. But eventually, as people figured out that throwing money at the supply side wasn't working, they started making a little bit of a change. If we're going to be spending these hundreds of millions of dollars, let's get something for our money. And we started seeing a change as the public health side started getting more and more money. They haven't had it long enough to really say how effective this has been, but it's definitely a change in how they budget. So in general, there's three levels of intervention. Need to know these. Abuse prevention is divided up into the primary, which is where it's about trying to keep somebody from using in the first place. Secondary and tertiary, we'll go through each one of these. Each one has a different population that they actually are trying to get to. Each side has a very specific goal in mind. So let's deal with them one at a time. So primary, again, our target population, those that haven't started down that drug path or have been exposed on a very low level. So the idea here is to get them from starting. So look at the level we're talking about, elementary and junior high school students, way down the pile there. It's based in the school because, of course, the kids are spending 8-10 hours a day in school. And obviously, another thing is about getting the community involved as well. So it's the first line of defense. Keep them from walking down that path. Secondary, now we're moving to individuals that have tried some drugs, tried some alcohol. They're smokers, maybe not hardcore, but they have started. So now we want to see if we can get that use of these substances under control. Keep it from becoming a substance abuse problems. And you see teaching strategies for responsible use. So of course what they're referring to here is alcohol and smoking, because those are still legal. Drugs, for the most part, are illegal, although if you're living in an area where some drug use is legal, i.e. marijuana, then they're going to teach responsible use of that as well. So it's about understanding how to enjoy in moderation, and I'm sure you've seen that term. This last one, tertiary, it's about those individuals who have already gone down that substance abuse path. So now it's about treating them and hopefully getting them off the path, getting them drug free. Their treatment ends when they're considered to be drug free. And of course, you're going to have to stay around, make sure they don't go back to taking drugs. That relapse, and I'm sure, as you remember from the alcohol chapter, a person may go down the path with AA multiple times before they actually are successful. And drug taking is no different. Uh, they may fail 20 times, but it's that 21st time that sticks. So these programs cannot be, excuse me, a little bit of help and then die. No, no, that help is ongoing for a very long period of time. So here's some goals and, of course, the end strategy here. Resilience is something that they're trying to get to, and this program here, again, part of the public health thing, they try first, fix their lifestyle, fix the norms that they follow, the mores that they follow, to make them understand that substance abuse is not a good thing, it's not an acceptable thing, it's something that they need to back away from. And then they look at their environment that they're in to help keep them from residing, so to speak, in that drug-free lifestyle. Because we know already there's lifestyles that are more conducive to taking drugs and there's lifestyles that are not. So we need to get them into the environment that will help keep them out of that lifestyle. The key word here is resilience, and it's about giving them the capital, the social and personal capital they need to be able to resist going down that drug use path. Usually it's about social skills, and the protective factors can be a whole laundry list. It just depends on the individual. But it's about helping the individual have enough strength, mentally, physically, emotionally, to resist walking down the substance abuse path. And it can reap some pretty big benefits as far as the amount of money that we're talking about here. There's a lot of dead people thanks to various drug use, alcohol, smoking, it doesn't matter. And the amount of money that we're talking about here is more than $1 trillion. And that's no joke. Okay, what could we do? For example, I know a lot of people ask for tuition assistance. Well, how much help could we hand out if we weren't spending $1 million, or $1 trillion rather, on drug problems? You know, that would fund a whole lot of free schooling and various other assistance programs. So this is kind of a rat hole that we're throwing our money into, and we're not seeing the kind of benefit that we need to be. Now, part of the problem is in how we try and measure whether a program actually works or not. It's not easy. Obviously, the question we're trying to answer is, are there less instances of people using drugs to the level of abuse as a result of that particular program? And we have moved to what we call evidence-based approaches, which means we have to, if you've taken research methods, you know we have to compare what the experiment, the drug treatment program, against a control group, and that makes it difficult. Just seeing some changes in our experimental group doesn't necessarily mean it's because of the program. Maybe the people themselves changed. So see why we make you take research methods? Anyways, it's just not that easy. We've had plenty of programs out there that have not worked. We're going to talk about those, and then we'll move into some that we have a little better results with. So, some of the ones that have failed. This is that supply side, okay? Keeping the drugs from entering the United States. And it's based on the, economic theory of supply and demand. The problem is, when supply drops, demand is still there, which means the price goes up. And it's when you attach this huge amount of money. Think about it. If somebody spends $250 to buy the ingredients to make $250,000 worth of methamphetamine, where does this work? Anybody who can make that kind of money in a very short period of time with a minimal investment, oh my God, I wish I knew of investments like that. So this really doesn't work very well. It's simply just has raised the price of drugs to such an extent that the addicts, people that are addicted to these drugs, are going to get them in any way that they can. And since they have to pay such a high price for it, that means that they're going to foray off into all types of criminal activity to pay for their habit. They don't necessarily have this, rich uncle that just supplies them with whatever money they need to buy their drugs. So this didn't work. Then we have to ask the question, how we even slowed it down, the production of bad drugs. Well, no, we haven't. None of what we've done is worked. We've tried to control borders. We tried to control it overseas. We tried to control it here. And the point is, it simply hasn't worked. What drugs we do intercept for all of the smash on the media when somebody makes this so-called $100 million drug bust, that's 1 out of 10, 1 out of 100. So how helpful is it? It looks great on TV. Every seizure, they make sure everybody sees it. They blast it all over social media. And of course, it's on broadcast media. But that's one of a huge number that are not caught. Not very helpful. Even alcohol. We have made some strides, limited, in trying to keep minors from being able to purchase alcohol. We have found DUIs going down, which is good, but we haven't found any reduction whatsoever in getting minors to not drink. So our secondary side of it, we've been good, but our primary, getting them to not drink in the first place, hasn't worked. It simply hasn't worked. So here we go again. Didn't work. We've also tried to punish people for using drugs. That hasn't been very well, or very successful either. They figure if people are afraid of being arrested and going to jail, that they will be deterred from using. No. Hasn't worked at all. First of all, it assumes rational choice. Okay, and we, for those of you who had criminology, this is a theory that says people make a choice. Now, again, maybe people do. But once they have headed strongly down that path of substance abuse, then it no longer is a choice. That choice is taken away from them through the fun of addiction. So the inducements to take drugs are a lot more powerful than the penalties, and even the penalties aren't consistent. So while the person who has the ability to hire that high-dollar lawyer can walk away versus the individual who has to make do with whatever lawyer comes down the pike, and then that person gets 10 years, well, who's deterred? Nobody, really. So this one doesn't work either. We also tried through that lovely thing known as mandatory minimums, where people did very long periods of time for even minimal possession or use laws. And this one has had a negative effect that far outweighed even the thought of any potentially good effects, of which it hasn't had. But the fact that it has drowned our prison systems and our jail systems and our court systems and our law enforcement in this merry-go-round that we can't seem to get off. We can't build our way out of the drug problem, and just building more and more prisons, we're going to end up locking up, half the population. So it's just not going to work. So it's failed all the way around. Now another one, I'm a product of this one, the whole scare tactics thing, reefer madness, and this is your brain on marijuana. Oh, some of these commercials were so bad, but they were aimed at various classes of drugs. And it was hopefully to get people to be afraid of the drugs, therefore afraid to even start down that path. And the bad part was they did this in a hurry. They thought, just a little bit would work. Whatever they did would be okay. And they were ridiculous. They were absolutely ridiculous. People kind of sat there going, what are you doing? And as a result, it eroded their own credibility, and people began to not believe anything that was said about any drug. So in some ways, it actually had the reverse effect. It actually, obviously, these guys have no freaking clue what they're talking about. Your brain is not going to fry because you have a joint. Therefore, they must be hiding that it's either okay or it's even perhaps good with you or good for you. I'm sorry. There was actually a commercials back then, and this was about smoking, saying that smoking was a good thing for the ladies because it helped keep them relaxed and allowed them to be more productive in the workplace. This is when we could still smoke at work. And obviously that wasn't the case. So you can see how this kind of backfired very, very badly. So what works? Well, here's some programs that have had a lot more success, some more than others, some good, some not so good, but here's just some other things. Now, this one is kind of it was good in some ways, not so good in others. So I can't put this one in the work category, but I can't put it in the failed category either. And this is where you gave real information. You simply said, this is what the facts are, this is the way it is. And unfortunately, for some of the kids that were really kind of interested in drugs, it actually piqued their curiosity. It made them more curious to try it. So that's a fail. It did work slightly for the kids that were less likely to use. It was kind of like, oh, wow, well, that doesn't interest me, so I'll just move on. So it was useful for some, definitely not useful for others. This one was a fail. While on one side, yeah, got the message out, but the other side was, okay, so got a message, but it didn't really have the kind of impact that they'd hoped. And these were these promotional campaigns. They showed them a lot at schools and even went to churches, any kind of place where kids might assemble. And they were hoping that it would keep people from starting, or if they'd already started, to kind of veer them off the path. The one thing that was good, it definitely sent out a very clear message to individuals. And what it did was kind of help kids that were already anti-drug, allowed them to kind of stand up and be counted. However, did it work overall? Not so much. Not so much. The kids that were already using, they just kind of used, okay? But it did have some tiny bit of success with kids that were not really into it to begin with. Now, the next program, they started to understand the link between emotional issues and the use of drugs, so they started targeting the emotional side. And very specifically, they looked at kids that used and what kind of emotional problems they may have, and then let's target the program towards that. And they came up with 3 major areas that they knew consistently that kids using drugs had problems with, with their self-esteem, which led them to having judgment problems and impulsive behaviors. And that, of course, means poor decision-making skills, and their inability to communicate what they needed or didn't need or whatnot also created more of a problem. So it was one of those ways to address the underlying problem that led them down the path of using drugs. So that was had some success with it. It didn't work well because they really weren't sure what they were doing yet, but it was, I like to say, the first step down a more effective path. It certainly wasn't the cure-all that they'd hoped for, and it didn't really even have that much success. But I see it as a success from the standpoint it was the first time to look at why people took drugs, not just treat them or lock them up and throw away the key. In the 80s, we started seeing the peer pressure type thing, which we know is an issue for youth. And the more kids that we could get to refuse to walk down that path, maybe they could help drag their friends off the path as well. And it wasn't, of course, just for drugs. It was about smoking and drinking and everything else. And it did work for smoking. It had some effect for alcohol and marijuana use only. It did not do a thing for the heavier use or heavier drugs. It was beneficial. It was beneficial for kids in the high risk categories. Why? Because they were the kids that appeared to be the most likely to listen to their friends. So if their friends helped drag them off that path, they went. So that was kind of useful. The success rates, some of them ranged as high as 35 to 45%. So that was actually something that really kind of had some impact. Now again, here we're looking at those underlying problems. We know there's all kinds of things going on during the teen years. So why were they turning to drugs? What was going on that made them look at drugs as a way to solve whatever problems that they were going? So once they identified some of the major anxiety causing problems, then we can teach them ways to help deal with that don't involve the use of drugs. For example, there's a tendency to drink as a way to mellow out, the term for my generation. It was just a way to chill, to sit back and relax. Well, there are other ways to do that don't involve the use of alcohol or drugs. So that was the idea behind this one, was teach them those other ways to deal with the stress, deal with whatever issues that they may be having, and cope without the use of reaching for some sort of drug. Now, also, we know for an absolute fact that kids struggle with their identity. They struggle with all the problems that they may be dealing with. And it's also a social time where they're struggling to find out who they are. So they've got to learn how to be themselves. And that's that assertiveness where they're able to stand up and be counted in whatever it is that they believe, whether it's a refusal to take drugs or anything else. It's just being able to tell your peers, hey, I like you, but I'm not going to follow you down whatever particularly bad path you may be doing. And it makes the kids, the idea here is to make the kids back up and think for a minute before they take that impulsive step. For some things like alcohol and tobacco, very often that first try is not very pleasant. People may be choking and gagging on the cigarette, or they may actually throw up, drinking or something else. So there's a negative consequence. Maybe that will be strong enough that they don't want to repeat it. But how about that euphoric feeling from trying that drug for the first time? Where's the negative consequence? So we got to be able to show these kids that the negative consequence may not come immediately. It may come later, but that's not something kids think about. So that's something that this program was trying to make them think a little more long term, not just in the next 5 minutes. Let's think about next week, next month, next year. Now, one of the better programs based at school is what's known as the Life Skills Training Program. This came out of Cornell University, their medical college, and it has 4 different parts to it, and it's about teaching kids how to make a little more responsible decisions, deal with their decisions, and accept the potential consequences. And they have used this life skills program, and it's explained in detail in your book, so I'm not going to go into a huge thing here. But it was about trying to address all the potential stressors, so to speak, that may start that kid down that path of drug use. And even if they have taken those first steps down that path, how to step off of it and go in a completely different direction. So this program has definitely had some successes. Now, we know from law enforcement for quite some time now that we can't do it alone. And this is excuse me, this is no different. We got to get the community involved as well. And the more significant the individual is in the community, the more impact that they can have. These are known as impactors, but a better term for it would simply be a role model. And when somebody stands up that is revered by kids, whether this person is a music artist, whether this person is an athlete, whatever, if they stand up and publicly address these kids almost like they're talking to them personally, that has a huge impact. And the more we can get that, the better off we are. These work. Kids follow their role models. Now, another thing is, we tell kids just say no. Well, that's really easy. But how about giving them something else to do? How about giving them something that they can say yes to? My generation was the first to do what would become known as the latchkey kids. Moms had always been home. Dad's work, mom was home. So kids come home from school, mom's home. And, it was kind of the Leave It to Beaver type of family environment, which, of course, first of all, wasn't for every family, but let's just say it was. But the generation of latchkey kids was, as the economy changed, moms had to go to work in ever increasing numbers, which meant the kids were coming home to an empty house. And a common thing that was done, and I was one of them, was to wear your key to your house on a string around your neck. I actually used to tie mine in my shoe. But anyways, you came home to an empty house. And when you've got hours to yourself to kind of do whatever you want, no guardian around whatsoever, no parent, no nothing, and you don't have any other activities, you're sitting around home, well, you're going to go hang with friends, and you might hang with that wrong friend that introduces you to something you shouldn't. So we knew from a delinquency standpoint, long time ago, that after school activities, giving these kids someplace to go and something to do that had just even minimal supervision would help keep them from walking down the path of delinquency. Well, that works for drugs too. The drug use rarely occurs at school. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but more of it happens once the kid gets out of school. So if we can give the kids something that they value outside of school, and that they hopefully value more than the walking down that drug path, guess what? This one works. This absolutely works. And it also is a little bit of a carrot and stick approach. Hey, you want to be involved in this? Guess what? You can't do drugs. I'll use myself here as an example. From littlest kid on, I wanted a horse. And with both parents working, I was starting down that path of, let's just say, not conventional behavior. Not drugs, wasn't interested in that, but definitely involved in things I shouldn't have been involved in. And once the horse came into the picture, wasn't until I just about hit high school, all of a sudden my parents had the ultimate stick. Slightest transgression, slightest problem, and the horse was gone. Well, they had a way to bring me to heel like a puppy dog, because I valued keeping that horse over getting involved in stupid behavior. So step off of the stupid behavior path and onto the more straight and narrow path so I could hang on to what I valued. And that's the approach here is A, involvement, give them something to do, and give them something to do that they value more than that potential of walking down the bad path. And this has been very, very successful. It works. It's good. So the more we can do of this, the better off we are. Now, the media is something we can either ignore at our peril, or we can embrace it and run with it and use it to our advantage. The one major study they've done with this, and you see this was 15 years ago, starting with kids that are quite young, still in grade school, you guys live on your smartphones, on your tablets, on your whatever, constantly. and they came up with 6.5 hours a day. So that means that's an average. So there's plenty of kids that are a lot more than that. And a lot of time you're doing multiple things. I mean, think of yourself. How often are you doing more than one thing when you're staring at that phone or that tablet? So we call them kind of Generation M for the amount of media control they have. So somebody starts saying, well, how about we look at how the media, if they're going to be on it for so much, let's see how that media impacts the potential of using drugs. And they said just music alone, just listening to music, it puts a lot of references to drugs in the ears of millions. So if this is happening, and it's happening as often as it is, the level of impact is absolutely enormous. So how about we take that power and we use it to our advantage? So this is one where the role models can be very, very useful, and get them to put the message out over the media. And here's another program that takes this and kind of runs with it. And it's called Cast a Start. And it's a community effort with law enforcement, drug officers, and other community leaders. They go after the kids that are most likely at risk and start doing interventions. Where can they help in the family? Where can they help at work? Where can they help at school? Where can they give the kids some sort of program to go to? And they provide services across the spectrum. And they've found that of those involved in this type of program, compared to a control with no help whatsoever, 60% are less likely to sell drugs and 20% are less likely to use or commit a violent act in the procurement use of drugs. So that's kind of a big deal. The more we can use the media, use a program like this to our advantage, to get our message out, provide those alternatives, the better off we're going to be. Now, I'm sure you've all heard about the DARE program. It started with LAPD and the LA Unified School District Police. And this was to target the youngest of kids to see if we could keep them from going off the path. And it was some basic ideas that they had tried. You know, they give them that general but real drug information. Start showing them how to say no, start showing them some alternatives, and they had some successes, so it kind of went, to use your term, viral. So now it's across the country. It is in the reservations in the Native American schools. It's simply everywhere, and it even expanded overseas. And this was more about keeping kids from starting down that path. So getting away from reducing the drug supply part to keeping people from taking drugs in the first place. And they divided out in this interesting little thing what they call the 3 R's. Recognize, when there's a potential problem, potential exposure, your peers are offering, whatever, your ability to resist it and to report, which that created some issues, but to just keep kids from taking that first step down. Everybody likes this program. Even the kids tend to like it. How well does it work? Well, it's limited. There are some positive outcomes. We have seen kids that remember what they learned and continue to use it as they get older. But it hasn't really impacted the ones that are actually going to walk down that path. So those that may be waffling to begin with, DARE works. for those that are really considering going down that path or have already made those first steps, then DARE doesn't work. So as we've learned this and we've dealt with it, they've kind of said, okay, we know DARE has some potential for success. What do we need to do? So they tweaked the program. And it's known as the Enhanced DARE. And it's now, instead of just officers, because I did this too, they would send us to school and gave us a little format thing that we had to, say this, do that. Nah. Let's get the students as part of it. Take some of the stuff that we have learned in other programs like the life skills training components, and let's have people that are trained in these programs come and present the stuff to the kids and actually sit and interact with them. Don't just get an officer standing up there in uniform, which sometimes freaks out the kindergartners, or all they want to do is listen to the siren. We need something that works a little bit better. And this has had a little bit more success than has the original DARE program. Okay, now a big thing that we know we have to deal with is, of course, the family, and mainly because that's your first line of defense. If you remember from criminology and the bonding theory, family was our first connection. And this is where we probably can have some of the greater impacts, is if we deal with it from the very beginning that the kid may be potentially exposed. And sometimes you have to deal with parents who think my kid would never do drugs, even though, that we just arrested the kid for selling at his school. Maybe the parents themselves are the ones with the drug problem, like the woman who used all 4 of her children to buy her drugs and the opioids, heroin. She finally got arrested when all 4 kids were already doing lengthy prison sentences, and it was right after that she went out to make the first ever in her life of 20 years of drug use, to make the first buy for herself, because guess what? The kids were in prison, and she wasn't successful, so she gets to go to prison with them. And then, of course, we have to deal with the families where parents are not present. And all of this is, again, things that will do a potential impact. There's a whole laundry list of potential problems where parents may not be involved. Maybe they don't have transportation. Maybe there's scheduling problems. They're working 2 jobs. Maybe there's a language issue. There's a million things that we have to make sure the parents are aware of to help them and join with them in keeping the kids from starting. So usually what we try and find is what we call a special role model, whether it's the parent, there might be other family members, but someone who's around the kid on a very, very regular basis that can interact with this kid on that regular basis and just keep nudging them back. Every time they take that step towards the drug path, nudge them back, keep them there. Help them in how to say no when their best friend tells them, oh, just try the joint. It's no big deal. You can be that person that says, let me take you on a tour of the jail. Let me show you where you're going to end up. Whatever it may be, that big brother, big sister type thing. Sometimes it's not even a family member, but someone who is there on a regular basis that can help keep that kid from heading down that path. This is just, again, trying to teach parents how to talk to their kids about drugs in a better way. We know nearly every parent, and I think they surveyed like 98% or something, say they have talked to their kids about drugs. Problem is, only about 60% of the kids ever remember the conversation. So obviously that conversation isn't sticking in enough of the kids. We need to figure out what it is that the parents are saying wrong or not saying at all that isn't getting through. And even worse, only half of those kids, about a little more than 25%, actually say they learned anything about the risks of doing drugs from their parents. And learning it from your peers, well, that's kind of the you can't get pregnant the first time you have sex, or if you turn around 3 times after sex, you won't get pregnant. Learning that kind of information that is so vital from people who don't know what they're talking about obviously can be a disaster. So we need to make sure everybody knows what they're talking about and are effectively communicating this information to whoever it is that they're talking to. Now, this was an interesting concept that they came up with. They called the triple threat. And these are the three things that tend to push kids down that path a little more easily. How much stress they're under. More stress, more likely to use. Pretty simple. How often they're bored. Well, this is that give them something to do after school type of thing. And this last one, which is why so many kids that come from very well-to-do families walk down the drug path as well. People tend to think of drugs as only a product of the poor, and that does not equate at all. The more money a kid has, the more likely they are to get involved in some sort of substance abuse, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, or hard drugs. It doesn't matter. Why? Because they have the money to purchase it. If you don't have any money and you want to keep up with your peers, as all kids like to do, you want that same clothing, you want that same iPod or iPad or whatever, then what money you have is more likely to go towards satisfying that more material urge than necessarily the drugs. Where if all those other needs are met and you have excess money, well, then hey, let's go try this fancy schmancy alcohol, or let's go try the drugs. Let's see what happens. So any one of these, or of course the combination of these, can really get very, very ugly when it comes to the amount of substance abuse we see. Now, when it comes to you college students, we have issues. We definitely have issues. Mainly because of the diverse nature of the crowd. We've got different cultures, different races, different ages, ethnicities. Some are part-time, some are full-time, some are employed, some live in dorms. You can see how diverse we're talking about here. And trying to get the message out to everybody is kind of difficult. So what they target then is two sides. One, the culture of drinking. The most binge drinking, of course, as we learned in the previous chapter, happens with college students. Frat parties and so on and so forth. And yes, I'll pick on the frats, but you know what? Sororities have them too. But trying to get them, to be more responsible. And we know when we target it from that perspective, it tends to work a little bit. We've got to change some of the culture a little bit. And that's kind of the hard part. Okay. We've got to keep in mind students turn 21 while they're at college. So drinking is kind of that rite of passage. Well, that's fine. So go have your drink. Celebrate that 21st birthday. But that does not mean you get pie-eyed. That does not mean you're worshiping at the porcelain altar, because you know what? As we talked about previous chapters, that can lead to a whole host of other problems. And what's problematic here, we've run into problems with alumni. When people have tried to crack down on, for example, alcohol or drugs, either way, in frat and sorority houses. Well, we've run into a roadblock from alumni from those fraternities, from those sororities, who kind of try and block the efforts. You know, you're impeding our First Amendment rights or something. And for example, something a little closer to me, I'm a smoker. And gee, every campus around is going non-smoking. You can't smoke here, you can't smoke there, can't smoke anywhere. Has it stopped anything? No, it has really just kind of driven smoking kind of underground. It hasn't stopped anybody. So we haven't been very good about getting it stopped by just telling people they can't smoke here. So what do we do then on the college campus? Well, we have to do a program that comes at it from all sides, and it has to be part of the curriculum. Some colleges now have a 1-hour course just a single unit. It's done during the freshman year, or if you transfer in, your first semester, you have to take it. And it's about alcohol and other drug education, targeted to these first-time college students. Here's what you're going to come across. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what you need to pay attention to. And the other side of it is to, again, just like we would with the younger kids, give them ways to interact, experience college, and all the experience that college is supposed to be. But it doesn't have to be done with drugs or alcohol. So let's give them a different way to do it. And also make sure there's ways that students feel comfortable saying no, saying, I don't want to do this. And make sure that the entire academic community, not just students, faculty, administration, support personnel, everybody has to practice what they preach. You can't tell a college student not to engage in behavior that you yourself are doing. It's that simple. The same thing we tell cops, the same thing we tell a correctional officer, anybody else. Would you trust a lawyer who's drunk trying to defend his DUI client? Got a problem there. So we have to do it from all perspectives, not just one. Now, what about at work? Well, okay, we passed our little act here, and it required any businesses that were receiving any kind of federal money whatsoever, that they had to have certain things in place to deal with drug use in their workplace. And it also gave some other programs that are useful, the employee assistant programs. A lot of times people that say they have an alcohol problem, let's use a college, a faculty member that has an alcohol problem is afraid to come forward and ask for help because I'm going to get fired. Well, the idea behind these employee assistant programs, and they're now common all over the place. Okay, not a problem. Not a problem. Your job will be held. Let's get you some help. Let's get you sober. Let's get you, where you can do your job. And their job will be held for them. And then we have the member assistance program. This was common at my husband's department and my department both. Generally, it's more the union involved areas, which some police departments are, some are not. But the union provides the support. So when you paid your dues every month, which came just direct deposit out of your paycheck, part of the dues went for these programs should you ever find yourself in a alcohol issue or drug issue or anything else. It paid for a lot of help, and it also, again, helped guarantee that job. So the thing, I can't say anything because I'm going to lose my job, was no longer really a potential problem. Now, when it comes to drugs in the workplace, and alcohol is included here, but there's some incredibly severe costs that can be involved. Think of a guy who drives a forklift and he's under the influence when he comes to work. The likelihood that he's going to either hurt himself or hurt somebody else is very, very high. For crying out loud, somebody gets behind the wheel of a truck that's hauling 60 or 70,000 pounds worth of God knows what, and this person has a drug problem. A law enforcement officer with a gun has a drug problem. You can see where the potential damage to the business and to society as a whole are enormous. There's the numbers. You can read them for yourself. But even these last ones, which people tend to think of as no big deal, whether they're late or taking extra days off or taking sick days when they're not really sick. The point is that the business loses productivity. We don't think, when we call in sick to work, we don't think of that someone else has to take up a position. If when I was working on the department, if I called in sick, that meant somebody had to take my shift. Whether that was someone who just was about to get off work and stayed for overtime, someone who was called in from home, supposed to have a day off, now they got to work. That's a potential problem. And while they may want that overtime, they may not want that overtime. And a person that's being forced to work a 16-hour shift, of course, is going to get overtired. And now you've got fatigue causing a potential problem. So all of this adds up to costs that the employer has to either eat, which employers don't like doing that. They're going to pass it along somewhere. Now, in public service, okay, they can't pass it along very easily. But if, back to our forklift operator, if he has to pay someone to come in and work, then the products he's moving around, for example, he can no longer charge $3 to move it. He's got to charge $5 because he's got to pay for all this time off and overtime and everything else because he's got people using drugs in his workplace. And that first one, which most people don't tend to think about, or even the second one, if somebody files workman's comp, meaning they were injured on the job, employers are required to have insurance that covers them in this instance. Problem is, you get workman's comp claims like any other insurance, your insurance rates go up, and they can go up astronomically, even to the point where you can't get it, and if you can't get it, you can't operate your business. So all of this can increase costs to an unsustainable level, causing a business to shut down. That means jobs are lost, or it gets passed on to the end consumer. So these are all a big deal. And there are some numbers. 60 to 100 billion billion dollars each year. That's no joke, people. It's just no joke. That gets passed on instead of screaming about the, well, let me use one right off the top of my head. The very first car that I bought brand new from a dealership cost me $5,600. That was brand freaking new. And that was a truck, by the way. My very first pickup truck to haul my horse trailer. Anyways, $5,600. Good luck buying any truck new for under $35,000 or $40,000. I just got a new dually, and the $60,000 price tag just about gave me a heart attack. And is that entirely because costs have gone up? Yeah. Are they making a profit? Absolutely. But they were making a profit before. So that's the kind of thing that can drive the price up of something we have to purchase. If we have to purchase groceries go up. Again, gasoline. There's all kinds of things that I can look back as a teenager and look what I was paying then and what I'm paying now. Yes, costs go up. We all know that. But how much of those costs are attributed to this type of problem? I don't know. I really don't. But I do know it does have a absolute impact. And while my salary has not gone up the same amount that costs have gone up, therefore that means the salary that I'm getting doesn't buy anywhere near what it used to. And you guys have seen this as well. So drug use and alcohol use inside the workplace costs us all money. Now, something else we have to look at is how different groups, different cultures, look at drug use and alcohol use. And we call these socio-cultural filters. This is where we have to see how public that fit within a certain culture might see the message we're trying to give. And then, if necessary, tweak that message so it has more impact, more positive outcomes. So, first one, Latino. Okay, there's our percentages. We know for an absolute fact there are certain things that will work better. One, reinforce the family as a group. Second, make sure fathers understand what their role is, how they can set an example, how they can be the full, good, effective role model. Make sure that the fathers are very much a partner in the parenting model that they give, and this is done from the what they call the macho or machismo. Yo, moms, let dads be a part of this. It works better if the two of you work as full partners. And when the female takes a position that she does all this old school female role. The mom who sacrifices everything for her children, who does all the discipline in the household, and remains, pure as the snow. That denigrates dads to a secondary role, and that is just not very useful. So don't make a female feel embarrassed or shamed because they have walked down that path, and don't let dads take a side role or none at all. Make sure both are involved. On the African American side, here's where we need to make sure that they don't get the wrong beliefs and attitudes and norms about delinquent behavior. In other words, a drug dealer that's walking around in his white Rolls Royce with his white fur coat on, and this person is glamorized holding a joint in a media campaign while seated on his car with 6 sets of women around him. You're glamorizing that drug dealer, and that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Even if they are a media star and whatever it is, whether it is acting, it's singing, or something, that's not helping, because then that person becomes a role model. That's not the kind of role model we need. We need a better role model. So let's de-emphasize this glamour of the drug dealer. And we know that problems within the social fabric of the African American group leads them more strongly down that drug path. So let's address those issues. Let's give them that resilience that they need, because we know kids can escape the drug use, even coming from exceedingly poor neighborhoods, as long as we have those protective factors, that strong family, maybe a strong religious belief. They feel good about themselves. They feel good about who and what they are, what they stand for. Help keep them in school, teach them how to cope with stressors, so on. All those things that we mentioned previously, let's put them all together, and that helps these kids avoid the potential problems, even from the worst slum neighborhoods. Now, from our Native American side, we've got some stronger problems. First of all, their use of drugs is higher than the general population. The last figures that we have date from 2013, but more than 10% of the total population, 12 and over, not the little kids, use some sort of illicit drugs. And when it's alcohol and binge drinking, it's nearly 25%, and nearly half of them smoke. So that's a huge, huge thing. And some of their beliefs actually kind of walk down that path. So you have to deal with a culture that finds some illicit drug use acceptable. So that's a potential problem. And the flip side of that is emphasize their cultural beliefs that drug abuse is connected to their evil spirit type embodiment. They break the connection you would have as a younger member of the tribe to the elders, which that bond is a very big part of their beliefs. So it destroys the harmony you would have with the tribal elders, with nature, and so on. So you have to kind of interact with their beliefs to make drugs the negative thing, not the positive thing. So we've got all these potentials to try to keep people from walking down the path. Well, what happens when they go down the path? Now we shift to the treatment side of things, and here's where we try and figure out how to get the person who is well down the path off of it, or at least back them up. Usually it comes from some sort of thing that pops up. It's external usually, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what am I doing? And they have become very comfortable with using, and to walk away from that is not easy. And it can be enormously frightening because it's the unknown. And they know enough that walking away from drugs is going to entail some pretty ugly days. So that alone, that fear, can be the barrier for them to ever walk down the treatment path. And of course, you have to remember, you have to deal with some people that believe, well, I'm strong, I can handle it, I'll never become an addict. We know that not to be true, but there's still plenty of people that believe they can control their drug use. There are 5 distinct change levels. The first one, pre-contemplation, this is where they kind of want to change, but there's no seriousness behind it. It's not something that's going to happen soon. It's just something that kind of travels through their head, maybe, sort of, kind of, someday. Okay, pre-contemplation. Then when they move to the contemplation, is now they have acknowledged to themselves, however lightly, they actually do have a problem. And they start thinking about the possibility of fixing it, changing it, dealing with it. They're not taking any steps yet. The biggest difference here is that they are acknowledging there's a potential problem. Then the prep stage, now, yeah, okay, I definitely got a problem. I really got to do something about it. And they start actually preparing. Generally, it's something that they will make that first big step about 30 days out. Excuse me. And chances are they may have already tried too. So the prep stage is just kind of, they're wobbling down that possibility, and they may have tried it a little bit, weren't successful, but we're thinking about it. Then the next one is where they actually start fixing themselves, the action stage, and they're trying to figure out what it is that makes them continue down the path, take that first step of making a kind of a change or overcoming whatever problem. But they're actually doing something. And then the maintenance one is now when they only get to this stage when they've been drug-free for at least 6 months. And they have developed the skills, the abilities, the strategies, however they developed themselves, or they had help from whatever, that help keep them from falling off that wagon again. And one thing that we absolutely know as certain as death and taxes, this is not something that they just go from 1 through 5. No, they go to 1 to 2, back to 1, back to 3, back to 2. Okay, they bounce around these steps a lot, and as I said, they may fall off that wagon 25 times, and it's the 26th that they actually stay on the wagon. So it's not something that happens A, B, C, D. It just doesn't work that way. So when we're trying to get somebody off of drugs, we've got different things that we try and emphasize. And the first is we've got all kinds of physical and psychological problems that are occurring because of the use, whatever drug they're using. There's physical issues and there's psychological, and we've got to get those undone and get the body and mind working better. Second, anything that they're using that could affect their mind, they have to quit using. Flat out, that's it, that's all. Because you can't make good cognitive choices and good control your impulses and so on if your brain's affected. So they've got to get that stopped. And then very often they have to rebuild their lives, whether it's through alcohol that they've used or drugs or the combination. Very often they've kind of destroyed their family fabric and maybe even their entire social fabric. They don't have any friends left. They don't have any family left. Everybody's, been pushed away, and now you got to put that jigsaw puzzle back together. And just like a jigsaw puzzle, it's not easy, and it's going to be done over time. So it's you have to acknowledge that change is difficult. How many of you, and I know I've done it, make some New Year's resolution? I'm going to do this, that, or the other thing, and it lasts till, if you're lucky, till February 1st, and okay, you quit doing it. Change is hard. Change is absolutely hard. And it's when it's something that affects your body physically, that makes it even more difficult. Just trying to change, I'm going to be less, I'm going to procrastinate less, okay? The bane of every college student. I'm going to make sure I get my work done. I'm going to get that essay started, before the week before it's due. That's hard enough. That's hard enough. You're not dealing with physical symptoms that show up when you stop using alcohol, stop using drugs, and whatnot. So they've got to deal with a lot of different things and going on at the same time. So it makes it hard. And how many treatment programs do we have? Not enough. There's plenty of people that need them and not enough that get them. We try and get people into treatment as early as possible. The earlier the better. The greater chances of success, but that, of course, doesn't always work. Now, one thing that the ACA did was actually mandate that insurance carriers had to cover, not necessarily at a high rate, but they certainly had to cover substance use disorders. So it was less of a money problem to get people into care. But that doesn't mean that there's still enough out there. To give you an idea, some numbers here, in 2016, close to 20 million people were counted as needing some sort of drug abuse treatment, and about half of them got it. So given those numbers, that's 10 million people that didn't get it, that needed it. That's a huge gap. So we need to make sure there's more resources available for those that want it and need it. We've got now a clearinghouse that provides some directed resources. Is it enough? Probably not. But it is a start. And like so many other things, to use a rather trite phrase, the longest journey begins with that first step. This is no different in that respect. But the thing is, it's a start. It's a start. We've got a lot more to go. We have not begun to treat everybody, and we're not even that good at treating everybody in the treatment programs that we have. But at least we've identified that previous programs aren't working. We've got some better ones, and I'm sure in time we're going to have ones that are even better than that. Will we have some miracle drug that we can just give people that'll keep them from becoming addicts? Maybe not during my lifetime, maybe yours. But right now, this is what we have, and we have to make sure what money we spend is spent as wisely as we can. So that's the end of chapter 14. That's the end of the class altogether. I hope you enjoyed it, at least a little. I hope you learned something, and I hope you take what you learned and apply it to wherever you end up going. So good luck to you, and thanks for being in my class.